My name is Derek Fisher. I have over 20 years of experience in hardware and software engineering. 7 of those years I've spent in application security as an architect and as a leader. My focus has been on education and evangelism. I also teach at Temple University. I teach an application security class there. I recently started a company called Securely Built for the purpose of providing security education to businesses and individuals. And with that, let's get into the security of IoT. So when most people think about IoT, the first thing that comes to mind is typically light bulbs. Now, only because this is something that's pretty ubiquitous. It's kind of like the entry point into, at least for home IoT. But the IoT space is much larger than that. And what do we mean by IoT? So the Internet of Things is a network of devices such as vehicles and home appliances that contain electronics, software, actuators, and connectivity, which allows these things to connect, interact, and exchange data. I shamelessly ripped this from Wikipedia. But basically what we're talking about here is digital bits controlling physical objects. And what's better stated there is digital meaning physical. So this isn't anything new. Obviously in engineering we've had the ability to send signals to manipulate physical objects for a long time. What's somewhat different with IoT is the ability to remotely access those devices. And obviously that's added an additional vector to IoT. So what are the different categories within IoT? This isn't an exhaustive list, and what you'll notice is that some items will kind of carry over into different categories, but I did want to lay out a couple high-level categories here. The first one, and probably the most well-known category for IoT, is what's considered consumer or personal IoT. So this is really wearables, smart home devices, monitoring. Many of you may have a wearable device on your wrist or in your pocket or on you somehow. These are, typically related to fitness monitoring and things like that. So smartwatches, fitness trackers, those are considered wearable IoT. There's also the personal assistants. So many of you may have one in your house, an Alexa or a Google Home or an Apple HomePod. These are considered personal assistants and also consumer IoT. Home robotics, now obviously not the robot that you would see in the Jetsons, Rosie, but things like the Roomba is probably well known. It's a vacuum cleaner that goes around your house. Typically you can set a schedule for it to go around your house and do some cleaning, but you can access it remotely, whether it's through a smartphone or some other device. Sometimes even I actually have one, and I have it connected, or I have the ability to issue commands to it through my Alexa. But not just the Roomba, but you also look at things like ovens, refrigerators, toasters, coffee makers. These are increasingly becoming connected devices as well, and fall into that category of consumer IoT. Another area is within energy and lighting. So as I mentioned, the light bulbs are kind of like the easy way of thinking of IoT, but also some may know of the Nest thermostat. It's a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat, but these devices obviously allow you to control the temperature in your house or the lighting in your house. So it's really one of the benefits of this is kind of energy saving. So you may have the ability to kind of remotely dial down or dial up your thermostat, based on the weather. Maybe you forgot to set it before you left, or whatever the use case may be. And last part of consumer IoT that's typical is home security and monitoring. So for things like sensing window breaks or burglaries or fires or CO2 monitors, these devices are also part of the consumer landscape. Another hotspot for IoT is in the commercial space. So this is where you would see things like in hotels and restaurants, retail and workplaces. Again, you'll see some kind of carryover from the consumer space in the area of like HVAC, so temperature control, lighting, and again, that's really around how to save money and be more energy efficient. You'll also see in security and safety, so as I mentioned, CO monitors, fire, and physical security, so break-ins and things like that. But where you're also seeing in the commercial IoT space is around robotics. So some of you may have already seen these in your local grocery store, but many grocery store chains are starting to have robots that kind of patrol the aisles. And these robots will, notice things, spills, or notice something that's out of place and alert, a person within the store, a worker, to say, hey, something needs attention. Now it's kind of you also see similar to Roomba, but more on a larger scale. Obviously, is robotic cleaning robots that they can put into stores. Actually, when I was in Los Angeles earlier this year, they had a robot outside of a restaurant that was able to kind of interact with the customer and offer up suggestions on beer pairing, for the sandwiches they were offering. Again, some of these things are kind of in their infancy, but you can see, as the space grows, that there's going to be larger use cases for them. One other interesting space in the commercial IoT is being able to use a customer's device to be able to locate where they are within the store and really pull data on where are customers spending their time, what are they looking at, what's really kind of doing well in terms of selling, device, or what kind of products are selling well, and where maybe stock needs to be, things need to be restocked because customers are spending a lot of time over there, or they're purchasing a lot. So you can kind of see the usage of a customer's device within a store. Again, being able to collect that data and being able to use it to provide better services to the customer and also more efficiency within the store. One other area is within smart rooms for hotels. Marriott is kind of on the cutting edge of this, where they want to have what they're dubbing smart rooms, where guests can kind of personalize their rooms with pictures and alerts based on their preferences. One of the other things that the Marriott representative that was kind of talking about this offering that Marriott's looking at is that they were saying that you can go into your shower within the Marriott hotel and they want to have a smart glass within the shower so that you can write notes in the shower and send that to your email, in which many of us in the security space would say, what could possibly go wrong with that? And for another example is with seamless shopping. So for instance, some of you may know of the Amazon Go store. This is a store where basically there's no employees within the store. The customer walks in, they pick up product off the shelves, they put it into their bag, and they basically walk out of the store. And Amazon is able to, number one, identify what you put in your bag, how much of it you put in, and without using any kind of RFID chips or any of the typical ways that a grocery store would track items as they're being sold. But the customer walks out to the car and gets an alert from their Amazon Prime account that, hey, you just been charged X amount of dollars for the product that you just bought with the Amazon Go store. And there are employees that work in those stores, but they're primarily there to assist customers, but not do the checkout process that you would typically see. So just another example of where, again, Amazon can do this without putting chips or barcodes or any of that stuff within the product. People are just picking them up off the shelf, putting it in a bag, and walking out. So it's a pretty neat concept. So another hot space within IoT is in the industrial space. And really you see this around manufacturing, mining, factories, and similar to the commercial space, the primary driver for this is to get efficiencies within a system, and look for more specific to the industrial IoT. You're looking for ways of streamlining your process, maybe locating anomalies and making sure that you're able to react to those anomalies as they happen. So, and really in the industrial IoT, it's really a convergence of IoT, AI, AR, and all the other acronyms that you can think of that are kind of hot right now. But the point is to get more data points, really again to drive efficiencies. So the way you see this kind of playing out is that the information from factory floors is fed back into an overall process that looks for inefficiencies early, and is able to do some predictive analysis to be able to say, hey, there's we're seeing some issues in quality control. There's potential problems down this road. Let's get in front of that. There's also the benefit of better forecasting, as well as inventory and fleet management. So based on input from maybe outside of the factory, they know that they need to ramp up, ramp down supplies. They know that inventory is going to certain locations. They have fleets that are that are taking that inventory to those locations. With all the tracking and analysis that they can do, they're able to drive efficiencies into that entire ecosystem. Just two use cases around the industrial IoT is that, for one, for oil and gas, they have pipelines that stretch across, take the United States as an example here, but there's pipelines that stretch across, the United States. And being able to put monitoring devices on those pipelines at certain points, they're able to detect whether there's changes in pressure within the pipeline, and that may be indicative of perhaps an issue coming up, maybe a potential leak or some other issue that needs addressing. Now, oddly enough, there was a story several years ago where somebody was able to hack into one of those devices to be able to read the data about the changes in pressure and be able to make assumptions about the change in price for that particular, in this case, we'll say it was an oil pipeline, but they were able to detect that there was a change in pressure and therefore a change in demand, and were able to time the market. And the story was that they were able to make some money on the market by pricing oil. I don't remember all the details on there, but basically they were able to know ahead of everybody else when the oil price was going to drop or raise, based on hacking into one of those monitoring devices. Another use case for in the industrial IoT space is in mining. So mining companies are able to predict perhaps landslides or equipment failure based on all the monitoring that they're able to put inside the mines or putting on top of equipment. And this obviously saves lives and is able to, again, drive efficiency. And that's really kind of the central theme here around, especially the industrial and in the commercial space. So the last kind of bucket of IoT that we'll talk about here, and again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are kind of the prominent ones. But the last one we'll talk about here is healthcare. So this is really ambulatory hospitals, health trackers, doctors' offices. You'll see a lot of devices in that space. So what's really, again, the common theme here is driving efficiency. So hospitals are able to reduce wait times by being able to better monitor patients and how beds are being used, whether they're full, whether they're empty, timing. Again, in these cases, the point of having these IoT devices is really to gather data, do analysis on it, and drive efficiency. But as well as the kind of monitoring and being able to react, there's also eAlerts. So all the devices, if you're in a hospital bed, you're typically hooked up to a lot of devices. Those devices will be able to sense or alert individuals when perhaps there's something coming up, or there's an issue that that somebody, a medical practitioner, needs to react to. There's also real-time tracking of patients, staff, and hardware within a building. That's kind of critical as well. You want to make sure you know where maybe it seems a little creepy, but knowing where your staff are, knowing where your patients are, but more importantly, knowing where your hardware is. So, in a lot of hospitals and doctors' offices these days, you'll see them carrying around tablets or mobile phones or some other device to do a lot of their work. You probably want to know where those devices are at a given time. There's also an interesting use case here with drug management. So there are these little microscopic pills that contain sensors that a patient can swallow. That sensor will then send back information to like a device that's being used by by the medical practitioner. Sometimes some of these sensors can be the size of a grain of rice. It just needs to have enough power to be able to send a signal out. Sometimes if it's it can be activated by perhaps a device outside of the body, but you can kind of see that the use cases that can play out there. Also in population telemetry. So this is when, for instance, instead of a hospital or doctor telling you, hey, you need to be admitted, you need to stay here, we're going to hook you up to some devices. In some cases, the doctor is able to send you home with a device where you can, they can gather the information from that device, when you're at home and maybe you're more comfortable. So, for instance, I had a sleep study done not too long ago, and back in the old days, 5-10 years ago, what they would do is they would send you to a location, you'd sleep in a bed, they'd hook you up to all these machines, somebody would be sitting right outside the room doing a lot of monitoring, and they would tell you, okay, relax and go to sleep. Now, for those of us that maybe presumably you're there getting a sleep study because you're having issues sleeping, it's not really the ideal place for you to get a quote-unquote good night's sleep. So what they've started to do is send people home with these sleep monitors, and basically you wire yourself up, you lay down in bed and you get your sleep, and then you return the device. The doctor's able to collect all the data off of that and be able to make some decisions off of that. So that's just an example of where the medical field is starting to send people home with devices as opposed to bring them in, admit them into a hospital or do tests within the location. So. The last, kind of use case here is what they call telehealth, and this is really, it's been around for a couple years, but it's basically where they're able to wheel a doctor in on a monitor. So you'll see kind of a monitor on top of a cart with a doctor sitting there with headphones on, and they'll wheel him or her into that patient's room, and the doctor's able to interact with the patient, basically remotely. But hopefully you're not getting this doctor. Now, for those that may have heard this story, this was earlier this year. Unfortunately, this patient was in bed, and the doctor was wheeled in, and the doctor gave this patient the bad news that they were going to die in the next couple days. So there was a lot of obvious uproar over the way this particular hospital handled this situation. For something so news of this magnitude, you would hope that your doctor would show up in person and say, hey, let's have a chat here. So all right, so with each of these categories, we're kind of seeing that there's an advancement in the miniaturization of technology. In most cases, it makes our lives easier. And these things are great for the most part. But again, for those of us that are in the security space, we're already kind of seeing like the questions that come up about just looking over this field. Like the questions are raised about what's going on with that data, how are we securing that, and we're already seeing examples of where this is going poorly. So for those that know, this is the Ring doorbell. It's basically a camera on a doorbell that's able to look out, and see who's coming to your house. Sounds like a great idea. But Ring has been in the news actually frequently just in the past several months. One of the stories that I'll raise here is that engineers and executives at Ring had highly privileged access to live customer camera feeds. I did not misspeak there. They had access to live customer camera feeds. Now you may think, okay, that's their doorbell, not a big deal. Ring also sells cameras that are inside the house as well. And the engineers and executives at Ring had access to both. And in this case, all that somebody needed in order to access the live feed was a customer's email address. So even though this story was kind of centered around, the engineers and executives having access, it wasn't limited to that. Anybody with a customer's ID or a customer's email address that knew, that they had a Ring doorbell and was able to, they were able to access this information. So it opened it up to people potentially outside of the company as well. Also, there was some man-in-the-middle vulnerabilities with the cameras. In some cases, the video was not encrypted, and you would have to be kind of on the same, you would have to be on the same network in order to capture that video, but we kind of all know, again, in the security space, how sometimes that can be trivial to get onto somebody's network. And also, presumably, somebody that has one of these devices also has other IoT devices that maybe Ring's doing the right thing, and they're securing their device, but another IoT device that gets compromised and allows somebody to get on the network, now you're able to see the Ring traffic. So kind of pivoting back to medical field, Medtronic, they're a maker of medical devices, implants, so back in late of 2018, less than a year ago, Medtronic had to disable internet updates for some of their CareLink programming devices that are used for pacemakers. So that should kind of make you sit up in your seat there, but these pacemakers would be implanted into somebody's chest, and what happens is the doctor will have a programming device that they keep in their office. If you show up to the doctor's office, the programming device, they hold it up to your chest and they punch in some stuff and it programs the pacemaker. There was a vulnerability in that device, in the programming device, that allowed somebody to be able to manipulate the data that could be sent to a pacemaker. Now, you would have to be able to get physical access to that device, but you would also have to know, somebody that was going in there, if you were targeting somebody, somebody that was going in there, that they were getting their pacemaker updated, and you were able to kind of, leverage that vulnerability in the device. So it seems like it's very a small set there, but it's still frightening nonetheless. If you were somebody that had a pacemaker in your chest, I'm sure you would be a little concerned there. Wasn't a few months later, earlier this year, in 2019, that Homeland Security had issued a warning for a set of critical rated vulnerabilities in Medtronic in their defibrillators. So so basically the problem here was that Medtronic had proprietary radio communications, but the communications were not encrypted and did not require authentication. So this actually allowed somebody remote, if somebody knew the protocol, they were able to sniff it, and they were able to modify, they could modify the data and send that to that device. Now again, you would have to know that somebody had that device, that specific device. You would also have to have the equipment to pick up, that signal and sniff it. But at the same time, if you had one of those devices in your chest, you would probably be concerned. And then this is the Google Nest Secure, and so this is one of the home assistants, but primarily used for home security. Google actually put a microphone in the Nest without notifying anybody about it, and without it actually being on the official parts list or the spec list. Google didn't even mention it. It was never announced. So when somebody located or found that there was a microphone in it, they raised it up to Google. Google came back and said, hey, yes, we put that in there. No, it's not enabled. We put that in there. We put that in there for potential future usage. So the use case they were raising up was that, hey, if somebody breaks a glass window in your house, we want the Google Nest to be able to pick that up and say, hey, there's a potential break-in happening. We need to alert some people. So, it sounds, Google's, kind of made it sound like that, they weren't up to anything nefarious here, but obviously putting in features that nobody else knows about, it's an additional attack vector. It's also just a little concerning that, manufacturing put this stuff in here without telling anybody. So why is this, why are we talking about this security, and why is this really a concern? It really comes down to that IoT is everywhere. It's in the house, it's in the car, it's in stores, it's on us. Yes, sometimes it's even in us. And in a lot of cases, I think what, personally what kind of bothers me is that there's a lot of cases where you can't opt out of this. Now I can have, I can take the choice of putting IoT light bulbs in my house. I made the choice to have an Alexa in my house and a Roomba. These are my choices, but I think as you see this space kind of expand, you're going to see that you're no longer able to opt out of these, being exposed to these things. And we're seeing a steady increase in IoT devices, so from 8 billion to 21.5 billion over the next 6 years, and that's a large increase. And honestly, this is what we know today. There may be new technology that comes out that we're not even aware of at this point. That's going to further increase the amount of devices that are out there. And one of the main points here is that security is top of mind. So here you see Bain & Company's latest survey of their enterprise clients reflects the broader market's high priority on securing and integrating IoT networks. So security is really kind of not only a concern, but it can become a barrier where, if you're not confident that the product is secure, you're unlikely to take it on or use it in the use case that you think you may be able to gain benefit out of. But if you're, gaining efficiencies in a system, by collecting data and doing the analysis and gaining that efficiency may be negated by a breach that potentially releases a lot of information that you just, because of all the fines and all the things you have to pay for, wipes away that efficiency that you gained. And, honestly, we're seeing the same security issues. And as I mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time in the web application space. That's been kind of where I've had a lot of my experience, and the web app, security space. And I kind of see very similar patterns here related to security in the IoT space as you would see in like web application security. And honestly, in some cases, these IoT devices have little web servers running on them. Sometimes they have Linux running on it with a web server. So depending on the device. So with that in mind, there's the same issues are there. So authentication, some as I mentioned with the Medtronic issue device, and that's not just limited to them. We see these stories a lot where there's no authentication, there's no challenge for somebody to have access to that device. Authorization: how do we make sure that people that are accessing that data or that device have rights to do that? The Ring doorbell example of engineers and executives and pretty much anybody that had an email address was able to was authorized to view live data feeds or live video feeds. Misconfiguration: sometimes thinking about this, it's really around how do we ensure that people are able to change a password on a device when they get it, and that they're not leaving the default password on there, because we all know that that's easy to Google that information and get it. And one other big point is not allowing updates. A lot of IoT devices, once the manufacturer sells it and it's delivered to a consumer, the manufacturer is out of that they don't have the concerns anymore about that device. It's been shipped, and they don't have any more reason to think about it. Network security. Obviously these are network devices. They're sitting in somebody's LAN. Sometimes they're exposed to the wider internet. So how are we making sure that those devices are staying secure with that type of an exposure? Supply chain. It comes down to security and encryption is well known. We know how to do these things. We know how to do them right. The problem is that in a lot of these devices, because of the size, they're small, they're miniaturized. A lot of times it goes to the cheapest supplier. You're going to get the cheapest devices and the cheapest hardware in order to make the end result cost effective for a consumer to purchase, because you're trying to be the cheapest one, because that's really what drives the market is cost. So to get to that point, you need to look at suppliers that have cost-effective parts, and unfortunately, cost-effective doesn't really contain security in a lot of cases. As I mentioned earlier, all that data, what are we doing about that data? Where is it being stored? Who has access to it? Is it being encrypted? How do you know it's being destroyed when it's no longer being used? Physical security, physical access. If you have a light bulb, a connected light bulb that's outside of your house, somebody can easily take that right out of your, socket there and run off with it. The Ring doorbell, same thing. Somebody could pry that right off the wall and run off with it. So, the concerns, maybe you're not worried so much about the theft, but what about the data? What about the ability for someone to maybe gain your Wi-Fi password from that device? API security. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of these devices running web servers, they may have APIs exposed or be calling APIs. Same thing kind of ties back to the authentication and authorization, but how are we making sure that that those APIs are properly being challenged? Cryptography. Sometimes it's non-existent. They may not be using encryption for whether data at rest, data in transit, or data in use. Again, it really kind of it's being driven by that supply chain, like what, the cost is what's going to drive the security, and if you're trying to get the cheapest product out there, security is going to be not part of that. So how did we get here? So the problem is, as I kind of mentioned here, and for those that know who Bruce Schneier is, he's a very prominent cryptographer and security specialist. But the problem, his quote here is, the problem is that there's no monetary incentive for companies to invest in cybersecurity measures. Consumers are going to buy the cheapest product without proper security features. So I can think of an example of, I went to Best Buy a few months ago, and I remember I have a couple Philips light bulbs in my house. They're the connected light bulbs. Those things are pricey. So when I was at Best Buy, I saw light bulbs sitting on a shelf that were maybe a third or a quarter of the cost. And the first thing that popped in my mind is, like, I know, not that I'm vouching for Philips and saying that they're, bulletproof security, but just based on cost, you can look at that and say, I guarantee that they're not, security is not top of mind on that company when they're selling it for a quarter, or a third of the cost of one that's well, better known. So it doesn't need to be hard to engineer, to securely engineer IoT devices. And really, what's the answer? There are some answers here, but what's really the answer? And I'm going to kind of dive into platforms here. So for those who don't know, platforms, there's two kinds of platforms. There's broad-based and there's specialized. When we talk about broad-based platforms, you're talking about Azure IoT Suite, or Google Cloud IoT, AWS IoT, and really what these services offer, and what's kind of common across those, is that they offer remote monitoring of IoT devices, downtime prediction, integration with existing systems, enhanced IoT security, and business intelligence. So maybe you're not looking at those platforms for your home, IoT needs, but it's really around business, industrial, commercial, like those kind of the bigger fish, I guess. They're the ones that are interested in these kind of platforms. Not to say you can't use them, in personal, but there's going to be a cost that's involved there. The other type of platform is specialized. So that's where the specific ecosystem has been, it's a proprietary kind of platform. So think of like GE or Siemens or SAP or Cisco. Their devices that have network capability, they're going to build a platform around that provides kind of those same things I talked about with the broad-based types. So the bottom line is the ability to connect devices and manage and monitor them on a cloud platform. That's really what a platform comes, what you can think of when you think of a platform. But it's not the silver bullet. It's you can think of it. It's a support software. It's handling management tasks, data visualization. And helps automate environments. But again, it's not really the end all. It's not going to give you everything that you need from a security perspective. It's really kind of designed more for that analytics and efficiency, as we talked about earlier. So, we talked a little bit earlier about that the same issues are in IoT as we would see in kind of web applications, and with that in mind, I think there's little difference in the way that we really approach how we secure IoT devices. So with web applications, OWASP has a top 10. Many of you may be familiar with the OWASP top 10 as it applies to web applications. They do actually have one for Internet of Things as well. And some of these things are kind of obvious and things we talked about here. So insecure network services, lack of a secure update mechanism, which I think to me is kind of like if you can at least, if you're developing an IoT device or if you're creating an ecosystem around an IoT, that the very least that you can do from a security perspective is be able to provide the ability for secure updates. And that really helps, when something is identified and issues identified in that device, you're able to push an update. Cell phones are kind of one of those common things that come to mind when I think about, secure updates. IoT is kind of very similar, where you go down to the store, you pick up a cell phone, and you may have that cell phone for 2 years. How many times do you get updates on that cell phone? It's not frequent, and you look at, like, if you have a Windows machine, you're getting those updates way more frequently than you are, on a cell phone. So, again, that's kind of like one of those things where, I'm kind of picking on that because I think at the very bare minimum, and having an update mechanism is critical. But you look at some of these other ones here. So insecure data transfer and storage, and insecure default settings. So we kind of talked about those before with kind of the same issues around IoT as they are with web applications. NIST 8200 defines the IoT space and security areas. So we all, for those of us that are in security, we all know and love NIST for all the work that they do there. They have a wealth of information around IoT in 8200. A hardware root of trust. So this really gets down to a hardware security module, and this is hardware dependent. So it means that you need to be able to. These things are available, as I mentioned before. Cryptography and security, those kind of things are solvable things that we've solved already. We know how to do these things right. The problem is it cost effective, and that's usually where somebody unchecks that box for the the security because they say it's going to raise the price for something. So a root of trust is kind of an example of this, where it's just a matter of putting this hardware security module within your device, and it's able to verify as the device is booting up. It has this chain of trust, or a root of trust, where it says, I know that nothing's been tampered with, throughout that boot sequence, and you know that you've booted up into a secure boot. And so again, these things are available. It's just a matter of being able to leverage them. Create a bug bounty. This is really something that has been catching fire lately. You see a lot of companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft creating these bug bounty programs around their devices and around their software. And the purpose there is really, companies spend money on getting penetration tests. They build red teams. They do all this work around trying to capture vulnerabilities as they come up or as they're discovered. But in reality, like, being able to outsource, that type of work to a broader audience really benefits your company and your product. And I think a lot of companies are starting to see that, where they say, hey, if we can get the world to do this and we just pay them, X amount of dollars, it depends on the company, it depends on the product, but sometimes you can make tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on vulnerabilities that are found. So, if you're really good at this, then you can definitely make a career out of it. But companies definitely, reap the benefits of that. They're able to really, it's free, not free, obviously they're paying for it, but it's a wider audience of penetration testers than what they would pay for like a pen test engagement or building a red team. As I mentioned, I can't stress this enough. At the very least, build an update mechanism into an IoT device. At least have the ability to push an update to that device if something comes up, because otherwise that device is going to be forever insecure. And really, if you're a company, you want to make sure that people aren't going to, look at that device and say, that's a vulnerability, I'm not going to use it anymore, and toss it. Maybe you don't care because you already made your money, but you may, you're going to take a reputation damage there. And the last point I want to make here is that security is really, security in IoT can be seen as a differentiator. So I mentioned Apple earlier, and I'm not an Apple fanboy. I'm an Android person. So, but I will state that there's kind of that sense with Apple that it's a walled garden versus Android's padded cell. But Apple is known for taking security seriously, taking privacy somewhat seriously. I mean, as seriously as they can, in our social media and data exchange environment that we live in today. But they really Apple really takes a lot of pride, and they put a lot of effort into making sure that their devices are secure. They curate the App Store. They have the secure enclave within their Apple devices. They build that trust with their devices because they know that their kind of reputation depends upon that. So now that's an example, but looking at the IoT space, you want to be the Apple of the IoT space, right? You want to be able to create a device that people say, I feel comfortable enough, that this device is not going to make my security posture worse, right? That's a key differentiator, and it's a brand, it's a boost to the brand. And with that, I appreciate everyone's time. Again, my name is Derek Fisher. You can look me up on LinkedIn or go to Securely Built, and I thank you all for your time.